director as well. We're going to hear, in fact, in just a second from Todd Berry, the American Football Coaches Association executive director. There is a lot going on right now in college athletics. Everybody seems to be in Phoenix. There are meetings, there are administrators, there are ADs, there are everything you could imagine in college athletics, including Todd Berry, AFCA executive director. Todd, I know you're in between meetings. We don't have much time with you. Has this been an eye-opening week for a lot of different people, and is it too late to make changes to try to maybe get things back on within guardrails?
I don't think it's been eye-opening for the coaches. We've been talking about this for a few years. I mean, all the things that are happening right now, these are all rational outcomes we've been trying to address them here for the last few years. In relation to the guardrails, I think there's some things that we can do to try to mitigate things to make it better for the student athlete, better for collegiate athletics. But when you start talking about the name, image, and likeness, and how that's gotten out of control potentially, buying of players, I don't think that can be stuck back in a box in any way. In terms of the transfer window, I think a better education for those athletes, knowing that not everyone's getting scholarships, and actually creating some windows, I think benefits the student athletes. They know who else is in the window, and then they can decide whether they want to transfer or not. I mean, these are really business decisions by the young people. This is not moving for academics. This is moving for opportunities or money. And, and so I think we have to take a different approach to it along those lines because of those reasons. And creating windows for them, I think, gives them opportunities to look in there and see what their competition is before throwing their name in at any random time as we're doing now.
Coach, You've been on with us several times and kind of opened our eyes up to a lot of things about, one of the things you mentioned was NIL deals that are kind of, put on coaches that they didn't really even necessarily ask for. And so now one of the offshoots of NIL has been that there's some tampering going on and probably most likely with these same guys, putting NIL deals on coaches. But how do you rein in the tampering? Because there are some coaches that'll probably resort to it, but there are some that do, at least maybe at this time won't do it because they feel like it's wrong.
Well, I do think that there's a moral dilemma here. I mean, I think the majority of our coaches got into this for the opportunity to develop young people and have an opportunity to impact their lives in a positive way from an academic standpoint. And, academics doesn't seem to be a part of the equation anymore. Again, with the name, image, and likeness, there's going to be very few things unless there's federal legislation. I mean, President Mark Emmert of the NCAA has been asking for this for a while. Sometimes he's been lambasted for it, acting like he was trying to avoid things. But the bottom line is the NCAA really they don't have subpoena power. So consequently, because of that, they really can't prosecute very many times. And when they can, it only takes them 2 or 3 years. And then the whole problem has changed and the young person's left or it's not fair to the current program. And we really need federal legislation on NIL that includes, maybe financial penalties, jail time. I mean, the federal government's the only ones that can actually intervene in this because every state, every institution currently can do different things in relation to NIL. And they're all trying to outdo each other to have the most liberal NIL opportunities that they can to attract student athletes.
Todd, you mentioned the part about academics just don't matter anymore. I mean, I saw somebody yesterday addressing that transfer window and said, what about how does this affect somebody as a student? And I think you just said it. I mean, is that just off to the wayside? I know there was a running joke maybe for a long time about the phrase student athlete and all that, but are we just crumpling that up and kind of tossing the trash can basically?
Well, I think there's going to be some student athletes who are, hopefully going to be looking at educational opportunities. I don't think that many that are quite honestly in the transfer portal window right now were doing it because they wanted a different academic situation. Right. Most of them are doing it for other reasons, as we suggested a couple years ago, even when we first started talking about this issue. It's difficult to get away from a pay-for-play model because as again, we've talked about name, image, and likeness. The cost of that, it's not like a product or service. The courts have ruled in the past, I can't go out and mow a lawn for $100,000. That's not the going rate. The problem with name, image, and likeness, and and that's why we're seeing boosters get involved in collectives and so on. Is just it's all in the eye of the beholder. I've mentioned to you guys before, I wouldn't pay a nickel to have dinner with Justin Bieber. Somebody else would pay $1 million.
Yeah.
That's up to that individual. And quite honestly, there isn't a set rate. And so it's going to be really, really hard to rein that in or to I know that there was some information that was passed out today that, said, okay, well, we're going to rein in the boosters. Well, how are you going to do that? Because the whole point in all of this was that the NCAA was too restrictive, the institutions were too restrictive, and now you're going to turn around and say that an organization that is associated with the program, that they can't use the same kind of business opportunities that their competitor can utilize in terms of being able to get a student athlete to endorse or sign autographs or whatever. I have a hard time believing that it's going to not have some litigious nature to it. I think, NIL is something that we're going to be dealing with, and that obviously is going to bring about conversations about should these young people be employees? Is there some status along those lines to help control this thing? Similar to professional football, the way the NFL has collective bargaining agreements and so on. It's a sad thing in my opinion. I'm talking for myself now in the sense that the scholastic model that we've been operating off of, and we're very proud of our graduation rates. We've done extremely well in football in graduation, much higher than the normal student, about 20% higher than the normal student. And I'm afraid that's going to slip because every data point that we've collected over the years suggests that regardless of sport, regardless of gender, regardless of age, GPA even, you can't look at a variable in the past that suggests that if you transfer that you don't lower your chances to graduate. And that's, I think there's going to be some strong questions moving forward from an academic standpoint, from a university president standpoint about, since everyone's a free agent right now on every team, and that's probably not going to change. Todd, then, how much is this going to cost us, and are we filling our academic mission?
Todd, what would you say, and I know you got to get into another meeting, what would you say when we mention NIL and I say guardrails, that's my term, or some sort of at least some rules that matter? And someone goes, yeah, but coaches get to leave whenever they want without any kind of consequences. But there are buyouts, and I think sometimes people forget that. Is there the difference, as you mentioned, between someone who's a professional and someone who is a collegiate athlete, or is that just no longer does that matter?
Well, I don't know that it matters, although I do believe there's differences, and all of us as coaches were student athletes at one point in time. And, I don't think many of us wanted to be employees of the university. We didn't want to spend 40 hours a week, trying to craft our sport along with going to class and some of those other kinds of things. And you mentioned, coach is employed. And as you mentioned too, there are consequences. I promise you, because I've gone through some in terms of if you leave, you have a contract and obviously I would hate to get to the point to where all of a sudden you just drop that punt, you're now fired.
Todd, thanks for the time you gave us. Craig, do you have anything else you want to add real quick?
I just want to ask you real quick, Todd, as far as the NCAA the legislation from the federal government, is there any sign that that's even on the horizon? Obviously there's a lot of other stuff going on as well, but it does seem like for years everybody's been waiting, and every time that they're waiting and they try to come up with something in the meantime, it's just immediately shot down and then you're just waiting again. So is this just a pointless waiting game, or is there actually a feeling that something could come from the government in regards to this?
I think there's enough problems with all this that there's going to be some federal legislation at some point in time. Now, I don't think that obviously in an election year that this is probably the best time. Obviously Coach Tuberville, who's the senator from Alabama, gives us some insight on some things. I talked to some other individuals in the federal legislative branch that, have been working on some things, but the likelihood of anything happening during this year is minimal. And so this is, we're going to have to kind of continue on our own, but I do think there's enough problems with this and everybody's starting to see it. And that's a good thing because again, as coaches, we've projected this for quite some time. And the fact that everybody's kind of pulling on the same rope saying, no, you know what, we've got an issue here that needs to be dealt with. That gave me some hope that there's going to be some movement now towards trying to create some of the again, the rational outcomes are happening, and consequently, it sent up enough alarm bells that we need to do something.
Hey, Todd, by the way, glad you're feeling better. Glad you're doing well. It's great.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Very much. It was tough time.
That's what I heard, man. Good for you. Thank you, Todd. Appreciate you squeezing us in. We really do. Thank you, Todd.
My pleasure. Thank
Todd
you,
Berry,
gentlemen.
American Football Coaches Association Executive Director with us. He's right in the middle of going from one probably meeting, symposium, whatever, and to join us is a big deal. You don't have to agree with everything he said or our questions or whatever, but that's a big deal to get him on, especially right now out of Phoenix.
I think